Our recording. Okay, welcome everybody. Bible study, and we are working today on, I don't even remember. Oh, Chris had a funny comment about this one. We're on Jacob. Jacob had a very interesting life. We're going to do Jacob today, and then we've got two more after this on Joseph. He's his big story. Okay, Jacob, let's talk about where we left off. We had first part of creation, right? The big flood, God starts over, Abraham's covenant, Sarah dies, Abraham's died. First he found Isaac a wife. Rebecca has sons, Jacob and Esau. And then Isaac is tricked into giving that blessing to Jacob instead of Esau. And Jacob flees, fearing Esau will kill him. And that's where we're going to take it from here. So there is some weirdness in here. There's some duplication of stories, right? And so I just want to remind everyone that most biblical scholars think there's at least two, if not several, core source materials here in Genesis. So remember Genesis 1, Genesis 2. Remember the stories of Abraham, she's not my sister. And so multiple different core source material by different authors, right? And that's why sometimes this story does not connect. It doesn't flow well. And that's why you see one voice that may be very favorable to the patriarchs and nothing negative about them, and another pretty upfront about how often they're going to screw up, right? Genesis is going to include all of these different core source material. Another thing that's going to come up, and it's big starting in Genesis now, and it's going to continue on in the rest of the Torah, which is a lot of resistance against mixed marriages. So we're going to encounter it. We saw it last week when Abraham was adamant that Isaac find his wife not from the people of Canaan, but from his hometown, right? So mixed marriages are going to be heavily feared by the main characters. And a lot of this is going to be due to this fear of assimilation and worship of other gods, especially the gods of the foreign wives. As you read through the Hebrew scripture, this is a theme that will continue throughout the Hebrew scripture. Also, mixed marriages lead to this potential to move away from one's family and one's religious identity. So when you come across that, put those ancient lenses on, that there was huge prohibition against mixed marriages, but this was also a time where you had different cultures with different gods and religious identities. And so forbidding mixed marriages would address that issue. Okay. I thought this was really something amazing. Marie said, couldn't be here today, but she sent me this email. She said, my father said something like this about Jacob. Many times in the Bible, long after Genesis, God is referred to as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Jacob's behavior was just full of dishonest and bad things. But the writers don't leave out Jacob. What they mean to say is, even though we do bad things, even as bad as Jacob's deeds, God is still interested in being our God and relating to us. I thought that was really beautiful. That was from Marie. Okay, let's start with Jacob on the road. Remember, he is running. He has to leave because Esau is going to kill him. He's young, he's unmarried. He is worried that he is being pursued, and his mother is sending him to her brother, Laban. So would somebody read this one?
Go ahead, Chris. Thanks. Just letting you guys know, my vision is really blurry this morning. So Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth. with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. There above it stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham, and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are living. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread and to the east, to the north, and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this.
Okay, Chris, we're losing your volume, so I'll jump in.
Okay.
I'll watch. Oh, there you go. Keep going.
Okay. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. He was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. Early the next morning, Jacob took the stone he had placed under his head and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on top of it. He called that place Bethel.
Thank you. Okay, so this is really covenant language, right? So we have heard this language before. This time, God is making a covenant with Jacob. So here's some of the ways artists have depicted Jacob's ladder through time. This is Chagall. These are amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what's going on? So Jacob had received Isaac's blessing, right? He's on the road. He has been told to go marry a Canaanite by his mom, right? And on his way, Jacob has a dream. So the ladder in his dream is planted in the ground. It's reaching into heaven. On the steps, he sees the angels of God going up and down. So heaven is no longer this remote place separate from where he's at. It is present in his dream. Heaven and earth are connected and each are affected and impacting each other. The kingdom of God is present right there with Jacob. Okay, and God is going to speak. This is the first time since Abraham, God did not speak to Isaac, right? Okay, so the first time since Abraham, God speaks and God renews the covenant with Jacob. That's that covenantal language of promises. So Jacob got this blessing because he tricked his dad. But here, God is entering into the covenant willingly and openly. Now, Jacob's going to wake up and acknowledge the truth of the dream. And at this point in time, Jacob's going to choose God. So it's no longer Isaac's God, it's his God. And he knows he was in a holy place. This is a poem I came across I want to read to you about Jacob's dream. It's called This Place, This Moment. Leaving a difficult situation, Jacob set out on a journey. He came to a place that called to him. And putting a stone under his head, he laid himself upon the earth and entered into dream time. A ladder appeared with messengers climbing between earth and sky. The infinite presence stood right by Jacob's side. Break through, the mystery said. Break through old forms, old patterns. Break through how you learn to see. Break through the confines of rational thought. Dare to dream. Be courageous with imagination. This is the gateway. This is the path, and I will be with you along the way. Jacob trembled awake. The infinite present is right here in this place, in this moment, and I did not know. We often get in our own way. Long-standing habits and the desire for certainty limit our vision. Fear binds us, doubt assails us. And what we thought would or should be obscures the path. Enter a new realm, the infinite calls. Go beyond what is known. Go beyond what is logical. predictable, expected, be with uncertainty, dream, imagine. This is the gateway. When nothing is known, anything is possible. How awesome is this place? Love and blessing to all. It's a beautiful way to think about Jacob's story from the Jewish tradition, a beloved, beloved story in the Jewish tradition. Okay, now we're going to get into Jacob's sordid history with his marriages. Somebody want to read this one?
I will.
Thanks, Shirley.
Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah had weak eyes, but Rachel had a lovely figure and was beautiful. Jacob was in love with Rachel and said, I'll work for you 7 years in return for your younger daughter, Rachel. Laban said, it's better that I give her to you than to some other man. Stay here with me. So Jacob served 7 years to get Rachel, but they seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife. My time is completed and I will want to make love to her. So Laban brought together all the people of the place and gave a feast. But when evening came, he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and Jacob made love to her. And Laban gave his servant Zilpah to his daughter as her attendant. So when morning came, there was Leah. So Jacob said to Laban, what is this you have done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me? Laban replied, it is not our custom here to give the youngest daughter in marriage before the older one. Finish this daughter's bridal week, then we will give you the younger one also in return for another 7 years of work. And Jacob did so. He finished the week with Leah, and then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife.
So the tricker becomes tricked, right? So Jacob makes it to his uncle's home. He is there to marry a woman, not a Canaanite, right? Jacob sees Rachel, falls immediately in love with her, and begins working for his uncle. So the question of his wages come up, and Jacob, who is utterly infatuated with Rachel, proposes this solution that he is going to work for 7 years, and in return, he gets Rachel as his wife. So 7 years are up. Jacob comes calling for his payment. They throw a huge party, lots of alcohol involved, and that crafty old uncle switches out the brides. So the intended bride, Rachel, is switched out, and her older sister, Leah, who we only know has weak eyes, and we can assume not a figure like Rachel's, takes her place. So Jacob is tricked by the darkness. We can probably assume there was some alcohol involved on that one. Kind of very similar to how he tricked his father, right? The morning after, Jacob is furious, but he agrees to spend the week with Leah in the bridal bed and stay another 7 years that he's going to work to get Rachel. So the tricker becomes tricked. Now, Leah is going to go on to have several sons. And so God blesses the least favorite wife with sons and fertility. All this time, Rachel remains childless. Leah will end up having 6 sons for Jacob and 1 daughter, Dinah. And we're going to come to Dinah's story. So Leah is very fruitful. And what's also in there is that Jacob also has children by all of the slave women that are there as well too. So there are several slave women he also has children through. So Genesis 30, when Rachel saw that she was not bearing Jacob any children, she became jealous of her sister. So she said to Jacob, give me children or I'll die. Jacob became angry with her and said, am I in the place of God who has kept you from having children? Then God remembered Rachel. He listened to her, enabled her to conceive. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son and said, God has taken away my disgrace. She named him Joseph and said, may the Lord add to me another son. Okay, so Jacob's family is really growing quickly. Lots of kids, lots of sons. And finally, Rachel gives birth to a son, Joseph. So Joseph comes along far down in Jacob's story, and that's going to come into play when we get to Joseph's story. His brothers are going to be quite older than him. The tension between the women grows, but they negotiate who sleeps with Jacob. So he's got several women, he's sleeping with them. All of these male children are going to go on to be the tribes of Israel. So there's real good meaning in all of the names of the children. So after a while, Jacob, with all these sons and all of these herds, he's becoming quite prosperous. He has really thrived in this new setting. And he's deciding that he wants to go home. But his uncle has a really good thing, right? Jacob showed up and he married off a couple of his daughters, and he's seen enormous prosperity. And he does not want Jacob to go. He figures that God is blessing Jacob, and God is in turn blessing him through Jacob. So Jacob's going to trick his uncle, and he's going to take the healthiest of the herds into his own. So we're going to get to the trickster again and the leaving. Anybody want to read this one?
I'll read it.
Thank you, Paul.
Jacob heard that Laban's sons were saying, Jacob has taken everything our father owned and has gained all his wealth from what belonged to our father. And Jacob noticed that Laban's attitude toward him was not what it had been. Then the Lord said to Jacob, go back to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you. So Jacob sent word to Rachel and Leah to come out of the fields where his flocks were. He said to them, I see that your father's attitude toward me is not what it was before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know that I have worked for your father with all my strength. Yet your father has cheated me by changing my wages 10 times. However, God has not allowed him to harm me.
Okay, so Jacob knows he's got to leave town, right? So things are going downhill fast in this whole relationship. Becomes apparent that Jacob's skimming off the best of the livestock. And Jacob gets a message. Remember, God is talking to Jacob. God talked to him in the dream at the ladder, and God's going to instruct Jacob to head home. So Jacob gets his wives on his side. So he gets Leah and Rachel, who are Laban's daughters, right? But he gets them on his side, and they're game to leave the only home they've known and head out with them. So they gather up all their herds and belongings, and they leave in secret. But Rachel takes along something that Jacob doesn't realize she's taking. When Laban had gone to shear his sheep, Rachel stole her father's household gods. So Rachel does this without talking to Leah or to Jacob. Remember, at this point in time, in ancient Israel, there were multiple different cultures with multiple different gods. So Laban still had the pagan gods of his ancestors, and Rachel steals those idols. Okay, so I'll read this one. Now you have gone off because you long to return to your father's household, but why did you steal my gods? So that's Laban. Jacob answered Laban, I was afraid because I thought you would take your daughters away from me by force. But if you find anyone who has your gods, that person shall not live. In the presence of our relatives, see for yourself whether there is anything of yours here with me, and if so, take it. Now Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen the gods. So Laban went into Jacob's tent and into Leah's tent and into the tent of the two female servants, but he found nothing. After he came out of Leah's tent, he entered Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the household gods and put them inside her camel's saddle and was sitting on them. Laban searched through everything in the tent but found nothing. Rachel said to her father, "Don't be angry, my lord, that I cannot stand up in your presence. I'm having my period." So he searched, but he could not find the household gods. Okay, so remember Jacob and the whole family sneak off in the dead of the night, right? And after 3 days, Laban goes after them. And he chases them for 7 days and he's going to harm them. But then he has a dream and God warns him not to harm Jacob. So after decades of taking advantage of Jacob, Laban begins to pretend he's a victim when he meets up with Jacob, saying he's the injured party. And Jacob tells them they had to sneak off because they were really afraid about what Laban was going to do, and he wouldn't let them leave. And Jacob really says, honestly, we did not take your gods, right? I have no idea about this. You go ahead and search. We don't have them. But Rachel has them, and she put them in the saddlebags, and she sat on them, and she can't get up because she tells him that she is having her period. So no idols are found. It ends up with Laban and Jacob splitting ways, and Laban blesses his daughter. He does not bless Jacob. Okay, let's talk about those stolen idols. You have to wonder if this author of Genesis is mocking the kind of gods that can be stolen, right? A woman menstruating is unclear in the ancient reader's eye, so sitting on the idol with no repercussions. So there's kind of like backhanded slaps against pagan gods here with this story, including in it really debunks this idea that the patriarchs only worshipped Yahweh. And this is something you'll see throughout the Hebrew Bible is that there are lots of examples of worshiping of pagan gods. That's where a lot of the conflict comes in, right? What was much more common wasn't that Yahweh was the only God, but that Yahweh was the God above all the other gods, right? So this story has been reimagined in the very popular book, The Red Tent. If you've ever heard of that one, it's the story of Jacob told through Leah and Rachel's eyes. So that's The Red Tent, the retelling of this story. And a lot of it has to do with the stealing of the idols. Okay, now we're going to talk about Jacob wrestling. Who would like to read this one? Go ahead, Chris.
Okay. That night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford to Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared."
Thanks, Chris. Here's some of the artistic renderings of Jacob wrestling. This is one of my favorites. Okay, So before Jacob can return home, he has to make peace with Esau because he cheated him out of his blessing, right? 20 years have passed since Jacob fled after having tricked his dad, stolen his brother's blessings. So Jacob sends messengers ahead to tell his brother he's returning home. He does not want to surprise Jacob. He finds out that Esau is coming towards him with 400 men, and Esau becomes afraid. So remember, Jacob is incredibly prosperous. He is coming with his wives, his kids, his herds, his slaves. It's quite a collection coming towards Esau, right? So Jacob divides his camps up so that Esau can only attack one of them and the other could escape. And he is going to take a chunk of those herds and send them ahead to Esau as a gift to try to make peace with him. The night before he is to meet his brother, he sends the family ahead. He waits behind. He's very anxious about meeting his brother the next day. And that night, a stranger comes, and that stranger wrestles with Jacob all night. And at the end, Jacob gets a new name, Israel. Israel means God rules. God struggles, God strives. So, because Jacob has struggled with God, he gets this name. This is the name that will carry forward. Remember, Jacob's kids are going to be the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay, so he loses, right? And he realizes he has been wrestling with God all night. And he names that place Peniel. That means seeing God face to face, right? So the really, really critical point of this story, and then it's a theme throughout Genesis, is not that you have to be unquestionably obedient to God, but this is a God that you can wrestle with and that you can argue with and that you can be in relationship with, right? So this is not a story of unquestionably being obedient to God. That's not the story of the patriarchs. Okay, so let's get into the reunion. Jacob looked up, and there was Esau coming with his 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and 2 female servants. He put the female servants and their children in front, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph in the rear. That gives you a good idea of how he prioritized his family, right? He himself went on ahead and bowed down to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. But Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him. He threw his arms around his neck and kissed him, and they wept. So that's how they come back together. There is no war, there is no conflict. Esau clearly forgives his brother and welcomes him home. You could be a little cynical and say the gifts and the prosperity with which Jacob returned was probably beneficial in that, or you could just say it was a story of radical forgiveness. So, okay, let's talk about the story of Dinah. Now, remember, Dinah is Leah's daughter. Leah has a ton of sons and 1 daughter. Now, Dinah, the daughter of Leah, had been born to Jacob, went out to visit the women of the land. When I think it's Shechem, son of Hamor the Hivite, the ruler of that area, saw her, he took her and raped her. His heart was drawn to Dinah, daughter of Jacob. He loved the young woman and spoke tenderly to her. And Shechem said to his father Hamor, "Get me this girl as my wife." When Jacob heard that his daughter Dinah had been defiled, his sons were in the field with his livestock. So he did nothing about it until they came home. Okay, So, what has happened so far? Jacob and Esau met, they made peace, and Jacob has gone to his homeland. So he is back in the homeland of Isaac and Abraham. He found a place to settle. He has bought some land. Now, Dinah has gone out. Remember, Leah's daughter has gone out to visit other women. And so she's left the safety of that community that Jacob has founded, right? So from the start, she's kind of being set up to share in the blame for what is to come. She's unescorted. She's seen by one of the king's son who takes her and rapes her. If you follow the timeline, she was probably prepubescent at the time. She was probably a child. So the king says he is in love with Dinah. He wants her as a wife. And so the king goes to ask for Dinah to be his son's wife. And in return, Jacob and his family can settle permanently there and have a ton of the land, right? So the king's willing to do this for his son. But Jacob's sons come back from the field and they come up with a really dastardly, deceitful plan. So they tell the king and his son that the son can only have Dinah if they are all circumcised, right? So they agree, and all the men of the city get circumcised. So these are adult males, right, who have been circumcised. Not only the king and the son, but all of the men of the city become circumcised. A very, very painful process. 3 days later, while all of them were still in pain, 2 of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords and attacked the unsuspecting city, killing every male. They put Hamor and his son Shechem to the sword and took Dinah from Shechem's house and left. The sons of Jacob came upon the dead bodies and looted the city where their sister had been defiled. They seized their flocks and herds and donkeys and everything else of theirs in the city and out in the fields. They carried off all their wealth and all their women and children, taking as plunder everything in the houses. Okay, so some things to struggle with in this story. This is not a story about Dinah's assault. It's a story about the perceived honor of Jacob's son, which has been insulted by somebody raping their sister, right? It's not about Dinah. It's about the fact that the sons are insulted. So, because it's such an insult, they are so upset, they end up killing all the males of this city when they are at their weakest, after they had convinced them to all get circumcised, and then they steal everything. All the livestock, all the women, they take it all. So what happens to Dinah? Except for that opening verse, she's wholly passive in the story. She's acted upon, given no voice. After she returns from the rape, she's never heard of again in the biblical narrative. So the whole narrative around the rape is told strictly through the perspective of the father and the brothers, who are all about exacting revenge, right? A lot of rabbinical tradition has it that Dinah becomes the unnamed wife of Job. So Job has no historical markers in it. The book of Job in the Old Testament, no historical markers. So a lot of rabbis have made him a contemporary of Jacob, that it's that old of a story. All of the different midrash accounts of Dinah's marriage show that she overcame the episode of the assault and went on to be married. And according to some of these traditions, either she or her daughter married some family members from Jacob's clan, and her descendants include some renowned individuals. None of that's in the Bible. She completely disappears from the biblical narrative after this story. Okay, it's a pretty crappy story of the Bible, right? So, and this is one of many. This is not the only assault in the Bible. So I think it's important to think about, what do we do with the awful parts of the Bible? It's really important that we put on our ancient reader lenses. These were patriarchal and misogynistic stories. They were told through the male lens. It's also important not to turn away from these stories, right? Sexual assault happened in ancient times. It's still happening today. 1 in 3 women, 1 in 6 men being sexually assaulted. And many have tried to reclaim these stories to look about how God is moving on behalf of the assaulted and the marginalized, the victim, both inside and outside of the scripture. So this is one of many kind of awful stories that exist in the Bible. So, okay, and then we're almost done. I want to end it with the end. This is Isaac's death. Shirley, you want to read that one?
Yes, I will. Then God said to Jacob, go up to Bethel and settle there and build an altar there to God, who appeared to you when you were fleeing from your brother Esau. So Jacob said to his household and to all who were with him, get rid of the foreign gods you have with you and purify yourselves and change your clothes. Then come, let us go up to Bethel, where I will build an altar to God, who answered me in the day of my distress, and who has been with me wherever I have gone. So they gave Jacob all the foreign gods they had and the rings in their ears, and Jacob buried them under the oak at Shechem. Then they set out, and the terror of God fell on the towns all around them, so that no one pursued them. Jacob and all the people with him came to Luz, that is Bethel, in the land of Canaan. There he built an altar, and he called the place El Bethel, because it was there that God revealed himself to him when he was fleeing from his brother. Jacob came home to his father Isaac in Mamre, near Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac had stayed. Isaac lived 180 years. Then he breathed his last and died, and was gathered to his people, old and full of years. And his sons Esau and Jacob buried him.
Thank you. Okay, so Jacob is going to return home. So it doesn't really, the biblical narrative isn't clear if that's because he had to get out of town fast after what his sons did. But God tells him to return to Bethel and settle there. But he's got to get rid of all those foreign gods. And we're going to hear this theme throughout the Old Testament. You've got to get rid of the foreign gods. So Joseph's going to collect them. He's going to bury them. And from that day forward, Israel will only have one God. So this is a pretty pivotal moment in Israel's history. Now, on the way, Rachel has one more son. She's going to have the son Benjamin. So this is Joseph's younger brother, Benjamin. But Rachel is going to die giving birth. Because they are on the road, Rachel, is not buried in the patriarch's tomb. Currently, the site of her tomb is actually a pilgrimage site for women who struggle with infertility and difficult pregnancies. So women walk around her tomb 7 times while they're winding a red string around their wrist in hopes of getting pregnant. And I'm going to show you some pictures of that tomb. But Rachel is not in the tomb of the patriarchs. So Isaac dies, and Esau and Jacob bury him. So they have come back together. So this is Rachel's tomb. And these are women praying in front of it. And just because I really want you to see how these ancient stories are being lived out today, this tomb is in a mosque. You can start to see it surrounded by barbed wire. It is in occupied Palestinian territory. That's the wall that it surrounds Palestinian territory. So Rachel's tomb is located in Bethlehem, and Bethlehem is occupied Palestinian territory. That site is revered by Jews, Muslims, and Christians. Now, about 15 years ago, Israel determined it to be a Jewish historical site. When they did it, that ended up derailing multiple peace plans that were in progress. So by Israel saying this is a Jewish historical site, it was such a contentious statement that it derailed all of the peace plans in progress. Again, this is Rachel's tomb. UNESCO, which is the United Nations organization around historical sites, stepped in and asked Israel to remove that site from its heritage list, saying that it was an integral part of the occupied Palestinian territories. And then UNESCO put forth a resolution that acknowledged both the Jewish and the Islamist significance of the site. So it's a mosque currently, right? And that the mosque that the site is described both as Bilal Rabban Mosque and as Rachel's tomb. It's not just one or the other. And this resolution passed with 44 countries supporting it, 12 abstaining. The United States was the only country to vote to oppose that. So it is a very, very contentious location right now in Bethlehem. It is under armed guards. So. Okay, so the question for reflection, and I'm not going to send you into groups for this one, is there basically, how does Jacob contribute in a positive way to the story of Israel? And how does he do harm to that story? So in what ways is Jacob worthy of the title of patriarch? And in what ways does he do harm to Israel's story? Thoughts on that one?
It contributes because he added to the covenant.
He did. He had a covenant with God. Yep. Paul, you're on mute.
Wasn't he the father of the 12 sons that became the tribe?
Yep. He becomes Israel, and it is his 12 sons that become the 12 tribes of Israel.
Well, I'd say that was a contribution.
Yeah.
And forget about the women. They don't matter. They don't count. They're just vessels for pregnancy.
They are. They are. Yep. It is a misogynistic patriarchal society, and it's a pretty patriarchal story.
That's why they're patriarchs.
Patriarchs, yeah. Yep. Though in the tomb of the patriarchs are the wives. So yeah, except for Rachel.
I'm having a hard time seeing too much positive here.
Me.
It's all brought about by deceit. And then after, Jacob was spent over 20 years, and his brother, when he shows back up at home, his brother finally forgives him. I'm having a hard time seeing this as being a positive story.
Yeah. Worse than Isaac or the same?
They both based on lies, or
Yeah.
deceit,
Yeah.
which seems to have been okay then.
Mhm.
Societies in the Middle East still value putting something over on somebody else.
And the secrecy and the lies.
Mhm. I have to say, when I read the stories of the patriarchs, I struggle with admiration.
Yeah.
I don't find a lot to admire. And in some ways I feel like it would be good to have a rabbi teach this class, to have a rabbi talk about why the stories of the patriarchs really matter. Because I struggle with it. I struggle to find things to admire and things to redeem. Now, when we come to Joseph, I think there's stuff in Joseph's story that is really powerful. But Jacob and Isaac, I don't know. And that may be just my, I need a Jewish brain to look at these.
I was going to say, they've been looking at these, and what the visual I get is when you wring a cloth with water, they've wrung out for centuries the goodness out of it. So I think maybe they see it a lot better than I do.
Yeah.
Well, sorry.
Go ahead.
I just wondered, is it necessary that we have to see it as redeemable? I mean, why can't it just be seen as a horrendous, awful set of situations?
The bottom line is, it seems like if you go straight to a bottom line, it's getting rid of all the gods and just having one.
It is, and that's big. That was really big in Israel's story. Very big. And I think, Shirley, the answer is that these are such critical stories for so many faith traditions that, the fact that the tomb of the patriarchs is such a venerated site by millions still today. That's where I think I'm personally saying I'm missing it. There are many who hold these stories as highly sacred and deeply meaningful.
Yeah, but I'm just thinking of various gods of other religious traditions, and some of them were quite, there were dreadful things occurring. I mean, that was not an unusual background for a lot of ancient stories.
Yeah.
And so it's part of that same kind of whatever it was that created that in early peoples to have stories of that kind.
Mm-hmm.
The way
I
they
wonder
came.
if it has something to do with the fact that grace is not earned by good deeds, that it's given by God, and we don't necessarily deserve it. And he obviously blessed some of these people who didn't do what you might consider the right thing. So it implies that God is seeing something that we're missing.
Mm-hmm. And that's why I think I resonate so much with Marie's quote. And again, I'll read it to you. Jacob's behavior was just full of dishonest and bad things, but the writers don't leave out Jacob. What they mean to say is, even though we do bad things, even as bad as Jacob's deeds, God is still interested in being our God and relating to us.
Right. And so the idea that they eliminated all the other gods would be an incredibly important idea.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions, comments, reactions? Leading us up through the last of the patriarchs. Joseph is not included as a patriarch, so Joseph's not included. Joseph is not in the tomb of the patriarchs. Joseph's going to die in Egypt. So this is the end of the patriarch story. Next week, the next 2 weeks, we'll finish up with Joseph's story, which is about how Israel ends up in Egypt. And that's going to lay the groundwork for Exodus. That's going to come after this.
Okay.
You mentioned earlier that Dinah, I think, possibly became the wife of Job. I think I heard you say
Yep.
that. Is that the Job where she turns into a pillar of salt?
No,
The
that's Lot's wife. No, the book
Lot.
of Job. Yeah, you're
Sorry.
talking, you're Job, you know, who the really faithful man who gets everything taken away from him.
Right.
That's Job's wife.
Wrong name, same three,
Same three letters.
both have
Same
three
three-letter
letters.
word. Yep.
Right church, wrong pew.
Right.
Yep. Okay, everyone, then I'll let you go. Next week, we'll do part 1 of Joseph.
Okay,
And
great.
we'll cover his Technicolor coat. So
Thank
that's
you.
next week. Okay.
Marci,
Okay. Have a good week, everyone. Take
Thank you.
care.
Thanks again, Marci.
You're welcome. Take care.